Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Poetry at the Point Online. My name is Kenneth. I use he, him pronouns. This is a reading series organized by the St. Louis Poetry Center that we bring to you monthly. And I'm really pumped to be with you this evening to bring you the poetry of Stephanie Schlaifer and Britny Cordera. Paul Stroble, who was originally slated to be with us this evening, actually had a last-minute family emergency. So good vibes and good thoughts go out to Paul and his family. And I hope to get him rescheduled very, very soon. So before we get started, a couple of really, really quick announcements. St. Louis Poetry Center turns 75 this year. I know I've been mentioning that to you a few times, and I know you've been seeing our snappy new logo there on the corner of your screen. We have had to bump some of the commemorative activities we had in the works to September. So stay tuned for that. We're just like everybody else on this globe trying to navigate this ever-changing pandemic. So speaking of which, our plans for returning to in-person events have been delayed because of the surge of the Delta variant in the St. Louis region. So both Poetry at the Point, this reading, and the Sunday workshop are going to remain virtual events in September. And we're going to hope to bring those back live and in person in October with lots of safety precautions in place, of course. We always want to thank all of our members and supporters at the St. Louis Poetry Center. You can become a member at the website, stlouispoetrycenter.org. Huge shout out to the Missouri Arts Council, whose generous support makes this series possible. So now a bit of self-promotion. If you're watching this in real time on Facebook Live, make sure and comment and share the link. And as you hear these two poets read and questions for them pop into your brain, please post those in the comments because we're going to have some time at the end to have a conversation with these folks, and we'd love to include your questions in that conversation. So if you're viewing this after August 24th, we're still really glad you're here, and we still really hope that you comment and share the video because we want to gain some momentum for the Poetry Center, for this reading, and then for these two poets' work as well, obviously. And we're also going to post links on Facebook as we go along so that you can support these folks and access more of their work. All right. So now on to what we actually came here for this evening, which is poetry. And first up is Stephanie Ellis Schlaifer, who is a poet and installation artist here in St. Louis, Missouri. She is the author of the poetry collection, Waiting Room, which I think comes out in a couple weeks, if I'm not mistaken, Stephanie, and Cleve Mark from 2016, and the children's book, The Cloud Lasso from 2019. Her poems and art have appeared in Bomb, Bennington Review, Georgia Review, Harvard Review, Iowa Review, Agni, we think that's how you pronounce it, Washington Square, At Length, The Offing, Denver Quarterly, Lit, Colorado Review, and on Poetry Now, and the Poetry Foundation website, among others. She frequently collaborates with other artists, most recently with Cheryl Wassenaar on the installation, The Cabinet of Ordinary Affairs, which had some corresponding poems for Stephanie as well, which are fantastic. That was at the Desley Gallery. Her work can be viewed at stephanieschlaifer.com. So without further ado, Stephanie, take it away.
Thank you all so much for having me tonight. It's a delight to be here. This is my first virtual reading, which is a little surreal. So bear with me for the awkwardness of reading, of seemingly reading to myself on a screen. Tonight, I'm going to be reading some poems from my forthcoming collection, Waiting Room, which comes out this October from Fordham University Press. The poems in this collection contemplate the mind as a collection of governing bodies. So I imagine that the psyche is run by a collection of political interior bureaucrats, each of whom governs a particular aspect of your mind. As you might imagine, they don't always agree with each other. So the first poem that I'm going to read tonight is called The Ambassador of the Interior Has a Talking To with the Minister of the Cabinet of Vengeance. God started small. At the first showdown between good and evil, God didn't come at anyone like a cowboy. God didn't open with solar flares or asteroids or mass extinction or planetary heat death. God didn't outgun anyone. God outmanned them. God made man in the face of the beast, and in the face of the beast God made, from inside the great and gaping maw, while languishing in the hot damp. In the face of that great terror, God summoned the smallest, adrenaline, serotonin, hemoglobin, oxytocin, motes of possibility. God started by making light into land masses, sand into vessels, preservation as civilization. And sometimes God won. The next poem I'm going to read is called Dictation from the Autocrat of the Interior, because I think we all have one. It was inspired in part by an actual botched email dictation that I received, or several emails actually, that I've received from people throughout the manuscript. There are a lot of technological glitches that manifest as internal human beings. So this is one of them. Dictation from the Autocrat of the Interior. Stephanie, dash. I'm writing because I want a new president. A different moment. A different moment feels like a different moment feels like the future. Right now, the future is dealing cacao, dealing with rivals, dealing with starting again. Stephanie, dash. I'm writing you from future, from a hideout in the mountains. I'm having a wonderful time. It's Pavlovian this time of year. Stop. I'm here because I wonder whether the current limbo can be toppled. No. Overcome? Question mark. Stephanie? Question mark. I'm hoping you can help me. Can you tell me whether you can help me build the infrastructure of a different moment where the weapon of choice isn't humanitarian aid, isn't humans, isn't a war that's not a war, doesn't have a non-disparagement clause, a smile, a nod, a thumbs up, bracketed by horrific tales of violence. But the future, Stephanie, the future is 99% hyperinflation, 100% under our noses. The state of right where we're sleeping, the drugs still flowing, the children taking turns cooking, the brutality, the brutal new light. This next poem is called Open Letter to the Minister of the Cabinet of Denial, the Quick. A lot of these poems were also written, I should say, as ekphrastics, both about pieces of art, but also intensely about the news. I've watched the PBS NewsHour every night since I was a child. And so for certainly throughout the Trump administration, I would sit down during dinner with my journal and either write down key phrases, work on poems, work on revisions while writing the news. So it's in part documentation and response, and in part just processing what's happening. Open letter to the Minister of the Cabinet of Denial, the Quick. Antarctica is calving, and we are broken below the whites. There's no umbilicus that tethers us to a less sordid past. The sun will always take the mother with the young. Try and separate your yolk from the threshold of humanity. See what fish. You too could heave a dead but breathing thing, a monster of man and woman born, of brine and oxygen, a salty molecule cleaved quick and dangerous. Don't say you never saw it coming. Don't say you have a hold on what breaks free from. This next piece is kind of double ekphrastic. It was written, a former professor of mine and dear friend who taught me two-dimensional design, and we have had a lot of conversations about the South where I grew up, and in particular about the Sherman Monument outside Central Park, and about context. What does it mean that the monument is there? What would it mean in another place? And in this case, the place is a painting by the painter Paul Cournoyer. And this painting, The Plaza After the Rain, is actually in the collection of the St. Louis Art Museum. You may have it on an umbrella if you're a member. And so this poem was written about Paul Cournoyer's painting, but in particular about that monument. The documentarian of the interior opposes the bill from the Minister of the Cabinet of Nostalgia. All monuments commemorate the same falsehood. The guilt is genuine, and we feel it right at the surface of our discontent. Anger, like so many lustrous mounts, softens in the rain, and stallions and generals must periodically be re-gilded, recommitted to, as if an abiding law of man. Though, if we are honest, it is the law that fails us, along with what we can abide. The fiction that what prevailed was thence purifying, thence pure, thenceforth glint and glistening. See how your face shines in thy horse's arse. See how the lie defines a nation ever after, north and south, brother from brethren, boots from pavement, ideals from dirt. All heaven in the sky, which all falls raining if Cournoyer's brush is on the level. Just cobble and cornice and hoofy mount, opaquely bronzed behind us. A forehand, sooty, puddled shadows. God, standing in the laws we made. God, standing in the light. I've written a lot of poems about natural disasters or man-made disasters, depending on your vantage point. This one is about Hurricane Harvey. Repose to the Cabinet of Consolations. Here's what we know about Harvey. In a 1,000-year flood, we are glazed over with disconsolate florals, unnatural violets, hyper-pale lilac. The only new ideas we introduce are new colors for the maps. The people of Houston are empurpled by rain. Harvey is self-fulfilling, self-inundating. It sucks up its own water and spits it back out, while people point to people as silver linings, as if a baby's drowned mother could float like a cloud. The human effect system is buoyed by ideas of mother as life raft, one instead of the other. We falter while we prosper, but blithely, with just the kind of thinking that sinks us. From the Minister of the Cabinet of Admonition. God gave you fire, but told you to be careful when you used it. You could use it whenever you wanted. but you could never be careful enough. You resented God every time a flame coiled out of your mouth with a mouth of its own. God is always playing tricks, you said. Or the fire said. You were never sure which. This next poem I wrote for my mother. It was the last one that I got to read to her while she was alive. And it was based in part on, I mean, I've written a lot. If you've ever read my work, you know I've written a lot of poems about my mother that incorporate things that she has said to me. So this one incorporates one of those last conversations. From the Cabinet of Survival Mechanisms. When the tests come back, I make deep fakes of both of us. In this life, my mother does not have a rectangular gray screen behind her irises, or that is the worst of our problems. I make like I'm good at fantasy and she's good at living it. We see nothing of concern. When the doctor asks, where does it hurt? My mother says, it's like a shoulder holster. I watch a lot of crime procedurals. But then someone, maybe it's Jim Henson, hands her a 6-shooter, and now we run the joint. I don't mind being felt on a green screen. I don't mind being tethered to my actor through a small steel rod. I don't mind the stitching hitching us together. Our lungs are massive now. We are almost at capacity. We talk about the news, about politics. Fake me says, if that man were the root of the problem, I'd kill him myself. I would too, fake mom says. I've thought about it. I wish we could do it together and get away with it. My mother would be so good at that, really. She's a realist. Watch me, she says, like she would never ever say. I think I make a pretty hot cowgirl. So the last piece I'll read tonight has a familiar refrain that if you made it through 2020, you must have heard 20,000 times. But I actually wrote this piece several years ago, and about the first observation of black holes colliding. It's called From the Press Secretary of the Interior, Gravitational Waves. They prove this week we're all in this together. Every time we move, we disrupt something intimately. Time is flexible, and your life is woozy gelatin. Draw a blade across, and you might grow to believe you are self-healing. But you cried out, and someone else absorbed the waves of pain you sent cascading outward. Someone so remotely distant from you saw the big one coming and let it overcome her. Someone nearer clung to filmy buoys and knew your sorrow deeply. But the nearest one, the very nearest to you, took it in the gut, and you trembled at how she stomached it and survived. You understood the reach of love. You walked away with proof that starry nets will bear your every grief. Thank you very much.
Stephanie, that was awesome. I have known you for a long time, and I've somehow managed to forget that you are a native Southerner. So that is something we will definitely have to marinate on a little bit at the end with Britny. So thanks so much for sharing your work, and we'll see you in a few.
Thank you.
Our second reader this evening is Britny Cordera, a published poet, nonfiction writer, and emerging journalist who investigates the intersections between the environment, climate change, religion, and eco-womanism. She is interested in how climate change continues to exacerbate the settler colonial agenda and how it is affecting Black and Indigenous communities. Cordera was a finalist for the 2020 Narrative 30 Below contest. Her poetry can be found or is forthcoming in Rhino, Narrative, Xavier Review, and Pank. She received her MFA from SIU in Carbondale, and when she is not reporting for FBO or writing poetry, Cordera teaches for the St. Louis Poetry Center. I think I've heard of them, and she roller skates in her free time. Definitely have to bring that up. I also would be remiss if I did not mention that she was a finalist for the 2021 Nash Poetry Contest for the Poetry Center with your poem. I believe the title was Good Feet, if I'm not mistaken. So Britny, welcome to the stage, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Kenneth, for inviting me to this reading. I'm really happy to be here. And wow, yeah, this was really interesting. I've never read on StreamYard before, or StreamYard. So yeah, I'm going to read some poems from my thesis. I wish that I had new work to share, but I don't, and I feel really bad about that because imposter syndrome. But yeah, I'm working on poems slowly, but I also had a lot of things going on this summer and decided to take a break on poetry to focus on looking for a job basically and skating. But anyway, yeah, I'm gonna read some poems and then from my thesis. And where do I start? Okay. Okay. I think maybe I should talk about my thesis a little bit, but the poems that I'm going to be reading are going to be about sort of contemplating slavery and the intergenerational trauma that it can have on this generation in particular, since my family, my siblings and I in particular are growing up in these times, and also how this intergenerational trauma exhibits itself in erasure, in finding out where you're from, finding out about your ancestors, and how that historical erasure is by design. Yeah, I think I'll just start reading. I'd like to start with the poem that was a finalist. Okay, so this poem is titled Good Feet. Your mother says you got those ugly things from your father, but you know better. You know all that walking between 1810 and 1860 flattened your arches before you were born. The constant migrating you do between south and north thereafter. Even though your mother's arches are high and perfect, you meant to walk the cosmos in 9-inch heels. Your bunions and cankles tell a different story. Someone whose master broke those appendages, boiled them in hot sugar juice. The months in summer you spent relearning how to walk when those muscles collapsed. The full cast inserts the doctors molded to your instep. The combat boots you wore every day for 2 years, they prescribed for the orthotics to fit in. None of this was an accident. They said you should get surgery. Your feet will fail you. Arthritis in the ankles and knees by 20. Yes, they are worn, but they are your birthmark. Scars that mean someone else ran for their life, so you would not have to run anymore. They are yours to fix. Okay, the next poem I'm going to read is, this is a 3-part poem. So one of the ways that I try to demonstrate erasure in my thesis is by having certain family events occur out of order, because a lot of those events, like we have a rough idea of when they happened, but there are just so many missing documents in between events that it almost just looks like a blip happened, like, and those documents just don't exist. So I try to exhibit that by having some of these poems out of order, and so having them out of order, but also having them follow a sequence, having them follow a story. And this is one of those sequential poems titled Creation Story. Creation Story 1, for my mound building ancestors. Before written words, a game of intergenerational telephone. Lavinia's echoes entangled through oak hickory forests. A god of breath alone on a mound, short of drowning in the young cyan earth. Forms animal shapes from the clay of this mound, breathes life into their hollow forms, teaches us to crawl beneath the ground, northwest, east, south, so the quartz sky gleams its brightest when it's time to leave our cave loom, the weeping not one of sin, but of reverie, for a place we've never seen before. A god who hopes this sort of beauty inspires a young species to keep the ocean's mirror from falling into the earth, keep this body from shattering. Creation Story 2. For Mom. The first time I saw my God in a movie, I asked afterwards if she was Pocahontas. I needed to know all the reasons why her hair was straight, unlike my fro, why her skin gleamed bronze, unlike my own, paler complexion glistening like starlight. In 3rd grade, everyone thought I was adopted or that you were Egyptian. She was Ishtar climbing out of the depths of the underworld. But you were my mother who wanted love from her children. The way she shapeshifts to hide from her own reflection, become lighter skinned with the wrong toned makeup, replace her pupil hued pools with blue contacts, and doesn't know her body will return to the river named after her, regardless of which son of a god she believes saved her. Okay, and then this is the 3rd in that series. Creation Story 3. Sometimes she treated the neighbor's kids better than her own brood. Never laid a hand on their face, no curse word ever directed toward them. She was Jesus and my friends, the 12 apostles who fed on the brand name fruit snacks, the grill meats from Walmart instead of Aldi. Though there was something endearing about this pouching our mother did with other children. My best friend became my sister, who had no such figure in her life. There was a time I would have had 4 older brothers instead of 2. Twice, 2 baby boys had been pushed down the stairs or beaten to scrambled yolk. I am 27 years old, missing an experience I never had, humans I never got to meet, and the skate parties at Skateland play days where I found balance. Strangers say that makes me a rainbow baby when the womb you picked cracked open too soon, grew life, then held death. Okay, it's only 8:02. Okay. So it feels like time went so much faster than that, but I'm just surprised it's only 8:02. Okay, I'm gonna read. How about Okay, I'm going to read this poem next. This poem was published in Tank magazine in their environmental future folios for Earth Day this year. This poem is titled Landfill. This is where our wealth haunts the earth. Bulldozers leveling back to dirt, frayed comforters, pieces of faces ripped from family photos, and collar marble clanging at the bottom of a black bag with dull spoons and a steel urn, sanctifying mounds of past hope. Metal corrodes quick in this acidic environment, leaves behind bauxite leachate, turning the land into venom. Like ichor, it disenchants the wind, ashes yoked in an alloy vase. Even when we drove past this graveyard, ice-capped on I-40, I smelled our bygones begging me to wonder, will I become that slurry if my bones are scrapped this way? I worried about the lost chicks a farmer ordered during the pandemic, the possums harvesting unfertile and half-hatched eggs, and the jewel carts or boba straws that sneak off into the ocean. I used to have hermit crabs with pokeballs painted on their shells, prayed they made their way back to the sea when they were lost, found them petrified under the kitchen sink after 7 months. Which is to say, we threw them away too, with all the witness propaganda, the red leather Bible you gave me that shed its spine. If no one can create matter nor destroy it, will waste come back to us in one form or another over time? A quilt of satin scraps, cracked MJ CDs, unraveled buttons. Can a grandmother return as my sister, my father, my cat, if given a second chance? Okay. I'm going to read another I'm going to read another sequential poem. So this one is a sonnet crown, and I'm definitely adding like more sonnets to it. But right now it has six sonnets. So I will read this, and then maybe one more poem, and that should be maybe one or two more poems, and that should be good. See if I can find it. Okay, and this one was published in Narrative Magazine this summer, and it's titled Mother of the Cane River Creoles, for Marguerite Guillory. 1. Circa 1731 Senegal. A legacy. Gazelles feeding on browse to the south of her village hut. The sun rising from the ocean floor to the east. The Sahara west of her home rosens the sky hazy pink with sand, carried from the harmattan. Memory sits with her like a dream as she stands chained to other motherless children in a coffle. They march towards a shadowy bow floating in the middle of the sea, creeping closer to the shore, a ship called La Prince de Conti. She'd never seen an ark like this before, didn't have a word to call this belly, never full, going to swallow her too. 2. July 22nd, 1764. Hang on one sec. I'm so sorry. Hang on one second. My internet or my browser decided to close out on that browser. I hope this is still working on this side. Not really. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Am I good?
Well, looks like we lost a connection with Britny, so we are going to hope to get her back soon. And in the meantime, Aaron, if you're good with it, I think it might make the most sense to bring Stephanie back up, and we'll start some conversation. And when Britny comes back, we can just bring her on into the studio and on into the stage. So there she is. Hello.
Hey there.
Welcome to the wonderful world of doing a live online poetry reading during a global pandemic. Well, thanks so much for your reading. I took more notes than I usually took, and it was all about big ideas. So I'm just going to jump right in. And I really want to start with being from the South, and it connects to, and tell me exactly where from the South you are from. I don't remember.
I am from Atlanta.
Atlanta. Okay. So I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and I think the first line of the first poem was "God started small." Mm-hmm. And so right from the get-go, you're making theological claims. And I think it's really, really hard to grow up in the South, even if you were not as exposed to as much religion as other folks. It is absolutely inescapable. So I just kind of wanted to hear kind of your, how either the religion you did or did not grow up with, because it's all around you in the South, kind of how that ended up influencing, theological claims you're making in your poetry as a grown adult.
I think, I was probably exposed to more religion than a lot of people. I was brought up as Jewish, but I also attended a Southern Christian school from 6th through 12th. Bible was mandatory. So I was definitely exposed to, other religions other than mine. And my mother's family was Methodist. So I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandparents. And although I was not allowed to go to church with them, my grandfather often watched. Oh, Britny is back. So let's pause there. Let Britny come back and finish her reading.
Sure, yeah. Hey, Britny, how's it going?
Hey, it's. Can you hear me? Is everything good?
We can hear you. We can see you. You're good. You have joined myself and Stephanie. We've just kind of jumped into some conversation. And Stephanie, go ahead and finish your thought. We were kind of talking about what it means to grow up in the South and to be influenced, whether you want to or not, by religion, and kind of how that shows up in your work. So Stephanie, finish your thought, and then I'd love to ask the same question of Britny.
Sure. So my grandparents were religious, and though I didn't go to church with them, my grandfather often watched church on TV if I was staying overnight with them. And my grandmother was always scribbling Bible verses down on pieces of paper that I would encounter, and just in random places. So I think that both as an important, the Bible is an important piece of literature. It was, and I think just thinking about, there are a lot of different dimensions of it, from, being exposed to Christianity and having a pretty solid foundation in it, which was not the religion that my household actually practiced, to also, I think my grandmother died suddenly when I was 11, and that was a really profound loss. So I think the combination of contemplating death at a pivotal age and all of that religion was. I write about God a lot. I don't consider them to be religious poems at all, but it's always there. So
sure, yeah, and I view this through the lens of somebody who has just enough theological education to be dangerous. So I'm always, when I hear those lines, it kind of, pulls up a flag in my head. I'm curious, Britny, how you would answer how, and I'm embarrassed to say, I don't remember where you actually did most of your, oh, hi, kitty cat, how much growing up you did in the South. But I know that in our interactions to get you to read for this. We did mention the South a little bit, and I do. You also edit a journal or help edit a journal that is focused on literature from the South, or that focuses on stories about the South. So I'm wondering if you might say a little bit about kind of what that means to your work, right? You were reading poems entitled things like Creation Story, right? Which is also kind of a theological claim. So I'm just kind of curious how you might think about that.
Yeah, I didn't really grow up very much in the South. My family is from the South, primarily like the Eastern United States, Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee, and also, which isn't really Southeast, but Oklahoma. So they're all like from that area, Arkansas, and there were definitely times in my life where I spent a lot of time in Georgia. My sister was born in Georgia, and like the times that we did see family were there, and then also sometimes they would come visit us. But yeah, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, but I guess my relationship to the South, I feel, is very complicated because I find myself like when I am in that area, something feels how do I say it? Like something feels when I'm in that area, something feels very like, oh, I can feel that I can feel like the migration, and I can feel that my family spent a lot of time in this area, and things feel very the surrounding and the land just feels very familiar, even though I really haven't spent that much time there, but and so like that comes up in my work because I want to reconnect with that land, but in a way that isn't as violent as the way that my ancestors connected with it. So so in a lot of ways, like I'm trying to reclaim that land. I'm trying to reclaim this. I'm trying to reclaim those stories and the stories to that land. And I'm trying to, and I'm working on being very vulnerable and truthful about how that land was, but at the same, there's not really a but also trying to transform the land as well.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, I have a very different relationship to the South, and I, as a white person, I think I found it interesting moving to St. Louis and encountering folks at WashU, where I went to undergrad, who had never been to the South, right, and had no personal experiences. And we would read a poem or a book or whatever, and all of a sudden, these dude bros from New England had all sorts of opinions about the South, and I'd be like, wait a minute, where have you been to the South? No, but and so I'm wondering how y'all resonate with this notion of, I always found myself in the position of being the first to kind of like defend ideas that folks had, to say, no, actually, it's a lot more complicated than that, right? There is a lot of good social movement happening, right? There's, but also the first to critique at the same time, right? So not only the first to defend, but also the first to critique. And I'm wondering if that's true particularly of folks who have some sort of connection to the South, or if that's true of just your home or your family or wherever you feel a close connection to, right? I don't know if that makes sense as a question, but I'm going to punt it to Stephanie and see what she has to say.
Well, sure. I'm certainly familiar with, here we go. I'm certainly familiar with being like the only Southerner in the room, and encountering some peculiar ideas that
Like you grew up with shoes? Can you believe it?
Yes, I had a whole group of New Yorkers convinced that pigs ran wild in the governor's mansion yard, and that we had just I convinced them that we had just gotten TB, like as a region, as a child. That was like the easiest lie I ever told. I mean, I think most often the frustrating thing to me is that there are issues that are obviously manifest in more overtly in the South, but that exist everywhere. And I think that it doesn't help. Some of the things that I work through in the poems are the origins of these myths that the South certainly keeps trying to perpetuate inexplicably. But those myths also exist in other places, and it's necessary to root them out everywhere. So it's convenient to try and believe that that the origins of a lot of our contemporary problems exist only in certain places. And that's, I think, that's the most dangerous myth of all. So
that's a really good point. I really appreciate you bringing it up. I think it's a very the South kind of becomes this fun and easy scapegoat for a lot of other parts of the country to kind of point to and say, like, see how terrible you are, and kind of miss all the things that they haven't dealt with. I want to, I'm noticing our time, and I do want to move on to something else that you all have in common. Before I get there, though, the question is, where are the best peaches in the South? All right. Well, the correct answer is Clinton, Alabama. No, go ahead, Britny.
I'm not from the South, so I don't know.
Oh, well, Clinton, Alabama is the correct answer. Peach Park. Moving along. Something that you both talked about, and both explicitly and then, even in your bio, Britny, is ecology and climate change. So I'm really curious about for you both to speak a little bit more about the influence of just I think of it as this just kind of like specter that haunts my days sometimes when I'm not having the best mental health day during a pandemic. And I'm someone who is actually in the middle of trying to write more of a collection of poems around climate change. But it's so, I think it's so large, it becomes too abstract for me to kind of grapple with. So Britny, I'd love to start with you, since you kind of even named it in your bio that, and you read a couple of poems dedicated to that subject. So when you have an idea that relates to something as big as that, how do you turn it into something that feels real and tangible, like a poem?
I think that something that I do is I pay attention to detail, and I do research. I learned a lot more about landfills than I ever thought I would, writing a poem about landfills. And it's things like that really interest me, because they are doing environmental damage, and they are stripping the sacred from the land, but like a landfill, when humans are gone off this planet, is going to be all the stuff that like lasts, and the earth is going to slowly, rid itself of it. But like, it just is totally astonishing to me that stuff is going to outlive us. And so a lot of what I do is I just do a lot of research. I become really obsessed with a particular issue. Like, for example, like in that landfill poem, I'm really obsessed with Stop Line 3 right now. I haven't written any poems about it, but it starts with the research, and I don't know if I'll write poems about it. I want to actually write like articles about it and lyrical essays, and more journalistic stuff. But it really just starts with the research, and I am really inspired by some of the facts and things that I find. But also it's really scary. Like it's I think it's I don't want this to be the case, but sometimes it's fear that like drives me to write these poems, because I do worry. Like I really, and in a lot of ways, like writing these poems is a way for me to let that anxiety go, and I kind of see it incorporating like and especially like eco justice in my poems is a way for me to feel a little less anxious.
Yeah, I envy that in you. Some days it feels like I've spent all my positive responses to fear on just showing up for work in a positive way, or treating my child in a half acceptable way, right? So I don't have any left for my art. I'm curious, Stephanie, are you also a researcher? I know you're, and Britny mentioned kind of taking that anxiety or taking that idea and channeling it into a journalism piece rather than a poem. And you're someone who is also a visual artist too, an installation artist. So maybe this is also a question for you about process, right? How do you go from kind of an idea about responding to a particular thing, an aspect of climate change that has sparked something in you, to a finished product?
I definitely do a lot of research. Sometimes I find the act of note taking to be a good way of processing the information that I'm reading and figuring out what it is that I'm trying to write about. You can go through copious amounts of information and discover like there's no poem in there for me today or this year. But I definitely do a lot of reading and watch a lot of nature programs.
Yeah.
As far as the visual art goes, I think that I'm pretty much the same way. There's a lot of both endeavors are very process based for me at some point. So, there is the receiving of the information and then the mulling it over in your head and waiting for it to come out the other side. I have written some prose pieces, but I really don't like prose. I know I work with a copywriter, so don't tell my boss. But I think there's a long percolation that happens, and I usually end up clinging to one image or one line, one bit of language that I have heard, or something magically comes to me, and then the work of building the piece around that, figuring out why that piece has such a hold on me is the work.
Yeah, right on. Well, folks who have watched this reading before know that I am very selfishly stealing ideas from other artists about how to work. So thank you for your ideas about the both of you for research. I'm also going to try my hand at this NewsHour writing practice too. That seems just weird enough that it might work. So I'm noticing our time. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to begin closing up this evening by Again, to go along with the theme of stealing, I like to steal a really fantastic practice from Al Filreis, who hosts a podcast with the Poetry Foundation. And he asks poets at the end to gather paradise. And so this is a really simple practice where I would love for you all to tell us one good thing that is really, really tickling your fancy these days, maybe hopefully in the world of poetry or in creative endeavors, something you're reading, something you're watching, something you are engaged in that's really, really fueling you as an artist. And I'll start to give you a couple seconds to kind of mull that over. I stumbled across a tweet that the algorithms of Twitter thought I might like, and they were correct. It was a short interview by Ross Gay on a website called The Creative Independent, which I'd never heard of before. And you can sign up for their daily emails. And each day it's like an 8 or 10 minute read of somebody doing something interesting artistically, just talking about themselves as an artist. So I really, really recommend that. I think the interview with Ross Gay was over the last few days. So really, really suggest that. So for lack of a better place to start, I'm going to randomly pick on Britny and see if she can give us another paradise together.
Honestly, I think that skating is my paradise. Yeah, that's not poetry related, but I do think of a lot of poems while I'm skating, and write down like beginnings to poems and things like that. But yeah, I really love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Stephanie, what about you?
Well, I definitely second the writing poems while engaged in some sort of intense physical activity. That is certainly incredibly helpful. I think what I am currently obsessed with is the Byzantine room at the St. Louis Art Museum. Just before the pandemic hit, I had started going. I took myself on a mini vacation every Saturday. I would get up and run and go to the grocery store and then go, I'd get a pastry and go to eat it in the car and go to the art museum to sketch for a couple of hours. And I'm pretty out of practice at sketching. So, but the process itself of just hanging out with these amazing artifacts is really extraordinary. And I've turned a bunch of those into poems themselves. That's, I think, the subject matter of my third book. And, I found that to be really nourishing.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm going to start to close this up this evening by letting you know that our next reading is September 28th. So please mark your calendars. We are, frankly, still grappling with how to and if we will be live or online after that. So just continued patience as we try to figure this out. Aaron and I pretty much decided this evening that the September reading will be virtual. So prepare yourself accordingly. Our readers will be Felicia Clemens, Billy Youngblood, and Jenny Mueller. I'm really pumped about that lineup too. So please make sure and keep an eye out for the September Facebook event on the St. Louis Poetry Center's page so that you can continue to share it far and wide, as I've mentioned a billion times this evening. And you'll also be able to view tonight's reading on Facebook after tonight too. So thank you so much to Stephanie and to Britny for showing up and sharing your work with us. Thank you for Aaron Quick, our wizard behind the curtain, turning all of Al Gore's internet gears to make sure everything works well. Poets, stick around for a few minutes, but everybody else, have a good evening, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.